Currently, the weather is relatively calm across the United States, and high pressure is producing a beautiful and mild weather bubble for us as we enter early November. At the same time, the tropics are heating up in the Caribbean Sea, which is practically open to the Gulf of Mexico due to our consistent weather here in the United States. So, any tropical activity that develops in the coming weeks has the potential to thrive in the Gulf of Mexico and move towards the United States. To top it all off, a big cold air mass is set to begin intensifying in the west. At some time, this mass will escape, bringing another cold blast across the majority of the lower 48. When exactly will that happen? And what if that cold air collides with some leftover energy from a tropical system in the Gulf of Mexico? Also, somewhere, a violent blizzard is expected. Where? You will find out in this video. Before we can talk about the inevitable crash of cold air, we need to grasp the scope of the forthcoming warm-up. A very big northward bulge in the jet airstream will allow considerably higher than usual temperatures to accumulate across the central and eastern US around November 3rd. So, let's dive into today's video about the concerning winter weather pattern which is developing this winter. But before we begin, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Everyone from Dallas to Chicago will likely experience unseasonably high temperatures and favorable weather overall, and with the exception of a few pesky rain showers here and there, the vast majority of us will be enjoying some really nice fall weather as this big warm bubble builds and becomes more rigid across the eastern half of the lower 48. However, a dramatic weather pattern change is on the horizon as a big trough is expected to impact the weather next week. This upper trough will deliver heavy rain, snow, and temperatures well below normal across much of the western United States. Moisture will first migrate southeastward from the Pacific into the northern Rockies, then into the southwest and central Rockies. As this cold pocket of air continues to move through the west, it will eventually reach the Great Plains and collide with the warm air that has been building up. This collision zone will be a focal point for a battle between cold air and warm air, resulting in rain, snow, and storms moving forward. Every now and then, the warm, wet air from the Gulf of Mexico gets a little feisty and marches north to grab more land. The cold, dry air from the Arctic notices the commotion and dislikes it, so it sweeps down across the Rocky Mountains to meet the warm air over the Great Plains, and a battle ensues, which, unfortunately, the cold air always wins, because cold air is more dense, heavier, and wedges itself beneath the warm air. The warm air then rises and self-destructs, exploding into clouds and disintegrating into rain and thunderstorms. In any case, this struggle is expected to launch a few weather systems that will cause severe storms and rain across the Great Plains. In fact, the Storm Prediction Center is seeing the same things I am, and they've issued an extremely uncommon Day 7 15% risk region for severe weather in sections of Texas and Oklahoma. This is something we need to keep an eye on because it appears to be the real deal. And one of the major contributors to this is the open door in the Gulf of Mexico, which is allowing in all the warm, moist air, resulting in scalding hot seas down there. The tropical Atlantic is still showing no signs of winter hibernation. I believe tropical activity will continue until November, particularly in the Caribbean Sea. In fact, as of the time of filming, the National Hurricane Center predicts a 70% chance of a tropical cyclone development in the eastern Caribbean, where a broad region of low pressure is producing thunderstorms that will most likely develop into a cyclone in the next days. Personally, I don't see anything significant coming from this system, but there are no tropical hazards. As a result of this prospective system, there is the possibility of further development in the Caribbean into the Gulf of Mexico, where water temperatures are virtually bathing, as any tropical cyclone that develops in the Western Caribbean after the next week might be a troublemaker here in the US. And almost all forecast models predict a very turbulent Caribbean as November progresses. However, there are no major tropical systems in sight as of yet. The basic fact is that whether or not we get a major hurricane or tropical storm, the energy is there. It's building up, and it'll be permitted to enter the US due to that enormous northward bulge in the jet stream. At some point, another pattern flip will occur, and that pent-up Arctic air will flood over the states if it happens at the same time that some Caribbean Ocean juices are rising into the lower 48. Things are about to become interesting. We've been discussing a lot recently about the polar vortex and how it's currently much colder than typical, and how a weak polar vortex is wavy and unstable, pushing troughs of northern air southward. Another way to think about it is to imagine the polar vortex as a flexible ball. The polar vortex is currently compressed, which means that the waves, or subboard taxes, are either closer to the North Pole or less conspicuous. But the polar vortex will soon begin to extend out again. When this occurs, a portion of the extended ball will sweep over the United States. Some forecast models already predict that this will happen after November 10th. Also, notice how the temperature anomaly pattern flips for almost everyone as November progresses on the experimental seasonal CFS model. One thing is certain, this stretching of the polar vortex is going to happen at some point. But keep in mind that these long-term estimates are subject to change. What I'm talking about in general is bound to happen. The minor minutiae that affect you the most, on the other hand, are still up in the air, and we won't know for sure what they involve until we get closer to the events. Having said that, here's my week-by-week breakdown of how I expect November to unfold. The prominence of that ridge will be felt most strongly in the first week of November, particularly towards the east. The orange area had the calmest weather, higher than average temperatures, and less precipitation overall. Overall, I believe we will have unsettled weather, which might be in the form of snow, rain, or severe weather in the green, and cold in the blue. Okay, but those are the main cold locations right now. Week 2 is when I anticipate to see the impacts of our enormous warm bubble flattened by unstable weather throughout a large portion of the United States, as the polar vortex tries to penetrate the US from the north. And week 3 is when I could be most wrong. I predict that our polar vortex wave will make an appearance in the east during this time, bringing colder than average temperatures and disturbed weather from the northern plains down to the deep south. This is also the moment to keep an eye out for the potential merger of tropical moisture, as a large snowstorm might form if everything aligns right. Week 4 is what I call La La Land, because no one knows what the weather will be like during this time period. However, the overall pattern suggests that another ridge will return to the central US after rising across the west, setting us up for another huge pattern flip and above average temperatures for many folks as we enter December. It appears that this will be the tale of this fall, which is not unusual at all. There will be several clashes between cold and warm air, resulting in rain, snow, and severe weather for millions of people during the next month or two. But despite this ongoing conflict, this constant atmospheric battle, the aggregate net average for most Americans will be lovely, warm weather. So that's a plus, right? Always consider the positive aspects of the situation. Don't be afraid. Instead, be prepared. So we wrap up our video here. Hope you enjoyed it. If yes, then go subscribe to this channel right now. And thank you for being here. And I hope to see you in the next one.